CIA Director Mike Pompeo was in the hot seat for much of the day as the Senate committee weighed whether to advance his nomination for the Secretary of State job. And much of the focus, you guessed it,
Russia.
And whether Pompeo agreed with the president's assessment about the ongoing investigation.
Do you think Special Counsel Mueller's investigation is a witch hunt?
Ma'am, I'm going to not speak about any of the three investigations that I have been a participant in today.
At one point, Senator Bob Menendez, the top Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, asked about a Washington Post report that claimed Trump complained to Pompeo and National Intelligence Director Dan Coats about James Comey's handling of the FBI investigation.
Did he ask you to do anything as it relates to that investigation?
Senator, I don't recall. I don't recall what he asked me that day precisely. But I have to tell you, I'm with the president an awful lot. He has never asked me to do anything that I considered remotely improper.
Did President Trump ever discuss the FBI or Special Counsel Russia's investigation with you?
Senator, again, I'm not going to talk about private conversations I've had with the president. I spoke with Special Counsel Mueller, who interviewed me, requested an interview. I cooperated.
Pompeo also refused to weigh in on whether he thinks Trump has the authority to fire Mueller or Rod Rosenstein, but said he would not resign his post if the president did. As for Trump himself, he says, quote, "If I wanted to fire Robert Mueller in December, as reported by the failing New York Times, I would have fired him." Just another indication he believes he has that authority. And he's getting some unusual backing, too, meeting with constitutional lawyer, Harvard professor emeritus, and Hillary Clinton supporter Alan Dershowitz Tuesday night, a man who recently wrote op-eds titled "Trump is Right," "The Special Counsel Should Never Have Been Appointed," and "Targeting Trump's Lawyer Should Worry Us All." But should it? Joining me to discuss all that are Kent Greenfield, a constitutional law professor at Boston College. Good to see you, Kent. Braude Bailey's a federal prosecutor turned criminal defense attorney who defended the man who called himself Clark Rockefeller, and former state treasurer Tim Cahill. He didn't call himself Tim Cahill. That was a separate client. Nice to see you, Brad. J.W. Carney, former assistant district attorney who defended James Whitey Bulger, among others. Good to see you, J.W. Let's clear up this issue, if we can, to begin with. He said today, the president, "I have the authority to fire Mueller." I mean, that was what was indicated there. A lot of people think, a la the Saturday Night Massacre, he's got to go through a senior Justice Department person like a Rod Rosenstein. Who's right here?
He is not right.
The president is not right.
The president is not right. So even Richard Nixon thought he had to go through the chain of command. He ended up firing Elliot Richardson and then William Ruckelshaus before he got to Robert Bork, who finally fired Archibald Cox. And so now I think Trump, according to the Department of Justice's own regulations, would have to go through the Attorney General, actually the Deputy Attorney General.
Do you agree with that, by the way?
Well, I usually do defer to the con law guys, on professors, particularly on things like that. In this instance, there is an executive aspect to it, and he is the chief executive. So I'm not so sure that Mr. Dershowitz is on the wrong track. But in terms of the advisability of it, that's a very different question.
Isn't it a distinction without a difference? It seems to me if you can't fire Mueller, you fire Rosenstein, and if he won't do it, then you fire the next guy, a la Nixon, until you find somebody like Bork. Robert Bork is willing to fire him, right?
Exactly. There is someone in the Department of Justice who will fire Mueller.
So it's just a question of if he can do it directly or if he has to do it indirectly. If you were advised, I mean, the walls are, I would argue the walls are closing around Donald Trump, particularly with that break-in, as he calls it, otherwise known as a warrant, to his lawyer's office, Michael Cohen. Why shouldn't he fire Bob Mueller? I don't mean this as a matter of principle. I mean, why shouldn't the president say, this guy's getting too close to me, at least privately, I'm going to can him through somebody else?
I don't think the search warrant for his lawyer's office directly is targeting Trump, except indirectly, because if his lawyer paid Stormy Daniels to cover up hush money, not talk about her affair with Trump, and it's viewed as something aiding the campaign, that could violate campaign finance law. And if the lawyer is guilty of that, there'll be enormous pressure on him to talk about the conversations he had with his client, Donald Trump.
Exactly, which is why I would argue, go for it, you're Donald Trump. You might argue there are going to be political ramifications. I'm not even sure what those political ramifications are, considering how tepid the Republicans have been on these kinds of issues. Why not just fire Mueller?
Well, I certainly think if your perspective is I haven't done anything wrong and I got nothing to hide, then you're just mucking up the issue. My concern, and I'm sure it's the concern of all the criminal defense attorneys all over Massachusetts and all over the country, is the sanctity of the attorney-client privilege and what this means of walking into Mr. Cohen's office with a search warrant. Now, obviously, they had to establish probable cause with a magistrate judge, a federal magistrate judge, but still, is this a fishing expedition, and what does that do to that very sacred privilege?
Well, doesn't the Justice Department, you work there, don't they have a separate little panel that looks at the questionable, the communications that might be subject to the attorney-client privilege and weeds those out so that the privilege is not violated, despite what Donald Trump is saying? By the way, Alan Dershowitz totally agrees with you, as you know.
When I worked there, they had to go through the Office of Professional Responsibility at Maine Justice. Now they have to go all the way up to the top of the office, and yes, they do review it, and they don't take it lightly, but it's still a very substantial issue.
How about my question, why doesn't he fire Mueller?
Well, yeah, I think that he's trying to have it both ways right now. He's trying to push back on these issues that we're talking about, but by the same token, he realizes, or someone's advising him, it may look bad if he does do that.
One reason why he doesn't fire him is because the political ramifications would be huge. Even if
you don't know that. I mean,
even if the Republicans don't step up and begin impeachment proceedings or whatever, but we still have a midterm election coming this fall. The Democrats are going to be very energized, and if either house, probably both, turns over to the Democrats, then they get subpoena power. Then they call Mueller to testify. Then all of that information gets transferred to congressional investigators.
But I think one of the reasons that Alan Dershowitz continues to say things like there was no power to hire a special counsel to begin with because there was no evidence of a crime is because, first of all, it's almost a moot court kind of thing because he's already been appointed. It's to diminish the credibility, I think, of the special counsel in the minds of the public so that if he does come out with a bill of particulars, I mean that not legally but in a de facto sort of way, against the president, his reputation, his credibility is diminished. Is that not obviously what Dershowitz is doing?
It might be, but he's got a very formidable target.
Mueller.
Mueller is a former prosecutor of impeccable credentials and unparalleled fairness in my personal experience and in the experience of almost everyone.
Does the attorney-client thing that Brad and Dershowitz have raised bother you? I would assume it would bother all three of you guys. Or does it?
The attorney-client privilege does not cover communications that involve committing crimes.
Right.
And so if the lawyer were committing a crime, whether finance, public finance, or political finance law, then his conversations with the president would not be covered by the attorney-client privilege.
Jay's absolutely correct that it doesn't cover aiding and abetting, plotting to commit a crime, conspiracy, committing the crime. The issue, though, is are you going into this lawyer's office, going into Mr. Trump's files, fishing for information about Mr. Trump that you don't necessarily know is there? That's a big issue. And what I also think that Professor Dershowitz is saying is, look, this is the issue and the problem that we have with special counsel. They're convened for one particular purpose, and then they go anywhere and everywhere and to now be looking at something that came up.
Well, Mueller didn't do this, by the way. Mueller referred this to the Southern District of New York's U.S. attorney who in turn did it.
It is his referral, and it's based on his referral, and that's what Mr. Dershowitz and others are kicking back about.
You worried about the attorney-client deal here?
Of course, in
general. And the notion, by the way, I hate to keep
yes,
quoting Dershowitz, who is not here, but the point that he makes is almost like a trickle-down impact. Your client's not going to trust you. Your client's not going to trust you for fear that the exact same kind of thing is going to happen with you.
The level of vetting of this decision to go into Cohen's offices and home or a hotel room was very high. Probably went right up to the top level of the Justice Department. It was vetted by a magistrate judge. So at least an Article III protected situation and process. And one of the reasons why he doesn't fire Mueller, perhaps, is that this referral to the Southern District of New York will go on even if Mueller is fired.
So it's
Here's another point that concerns me about the use of a search warrant. Quite frequently, when the Justice Department wants to get records from someone, they give them a subpoena to bring the records to the grand jury. The fact that he sought a subpoena that allows him to go in and go fishing through all of the lawyer's records is very troubling. If he wanted to really target records that he thought were directly relevant to the criminal case, give the lawyer a subpoena, let him challenge the subpoena.
It's not as scary as that. Don't you think the reason he did it in the hopes that he squeezes Michael Cohen, and as Stormy Daniels says on every television show that invites him, Cohen's going to fold like a cheap deck of cards because he's scared. Before we go very quickly down the line, assuming you were the guy at dinner Tuesday night eating guinea hen with the president rather than, according to Matt Visor in the Globe, rather than Alan Dershowitz, very quickly, what's the one major piece of legal advice you've given the president?
Stop tweeting.
Really? Mm-hmm. How about you?
Don't answer questions before the special counsel.
How about you?
Cannot fire Mueller.
Fair enough. Kent, good to see
Great,
you.
thanks.
Brad, thank you.
Thank you,
Jay.
Jay.
Pleasure as always.
Okay,
gentlemen, thank you.